The lilies on the mantel had begun to droop their petals bruised at the edges, yet the fragrance clung stubbornly to every corner of the house. It was a perfume of endings, sweet and decayed, at once mingling with the salt air that slipped in through the cracked kitchen window. I had not moved them. Some part of me thought Dominic would have wanted them there a little longer. The last reminder of those who came, spoke their condolences, and hurried back to their own lives. My coffee steamed quietly beside me, but I hadn't taken a sip. The mug read, "Best of everything, always." A gift from Dominic on our 25th anniversary. I traced the lettering with my thumb as the phone vibrated against the table. It was Maribel again. She never called anymore, only texted short blasts that landed like commands. "Start packing. I sold it, that was all." 4 words, unsoftened by apology or hesitation. I read it twice then, a third time, letting the silence of the house settle around me like a heavy coat. Outside, gulls wheeled above the harbor, their cries sharp against the morning sky. For a moment, I imagined Dominic at the kitchen counter, shaking his head at the way our daughter could rush through a life without ever stopping to breathe. He would have said, "Let her think she's in control. It costs you nothing to let her believe." But this time, it did cost me something. It cost me the illusion that grief had bought me patience. I set the phone down and found to my own surprise that I was smiling. Not out of cruelty, not even rebellion, but from a small private knowledge that Maribel could never take from me. She thought she had sold the only house that mattered. She thought her mother was trapped cornered, waiting for orders. I rose from the chair and walked to the oak cabinet in the hall, the one that creaked when you pulled the lower drawer. Inside lay the papers Dominic had hidden so carefully, bound together with a leather strap. I had touched them once in the days just after the funeral, but hadn't dared open them fully. Not yet. The cover was worn smooth by his hands, as though he'd returned to it often, rehearsing some plan he never spoke aloud. My fingertips brushed over the spine, and I felt that old steadiness of his beside me, the quiet conviction that the world would not collapse if we carried our secrets a little while longer. Maribel's text still glowed on the phone in the kitchen, a cold insistence that I uproot my life for her convenience. She didn't know about the villa in Italy, the deed written in my name alone, tucked between Dominic's pension papers and the investment summaries. She didn't know about the letter sealed with his careful hand, marked only with the words, 30 days after. 30 days after his death. I had counted them without realizing it. Each morning since the burial, I had marked another tally in my mind each evening, another small ache in my chest. Today the lilies sagged, the tide shifted, and the 30th day had arrived. I drew a breath steady and slow and lifted the ledger into my arms. Dust rose in a thin halo as I carried it back to the kitchen, the same kitchen where Dominic once planned summer trips. We never took where Maribel once sat, swinging her legs and asking endless questions. I set the book on the table beside the untouched coffee, the leather strap cool beneath my fingers. Outside, the gulls still cried, but the sound no longer seemed sharp. It was a call distant yet certain, as if the ocean itself had decided it was time to speak. And so I loosened the strap and opened the ledger to the first page where his handwriting waited for me. The ledger smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the scent of Dominic's study, where he had spent late nights bent over his papers with a lamp angled low. I used to tease him about hoarding receipts, but he always answered with that quiet smile that told me he was building a structure invisible to me yet solid beneath our lives. Now the structure was mine alone to examine. The first pages were careful columns of numbers written in his even deliberate hand. Bank accounts I recognized, balances I had seen on statements, all organized more neatly than I would have bothered to keep them. Then came the pension figures, more generous than I had expected. I ran my fingers over the ink as if I could still feel the pressure of his pen strokes, proof that he had thought of me, even when he knew time was running out. Further along, tucked between pages, I found photocopies of stock portfolios and investment summaries. He had annotated them with notes in the margins, arrows underlines the occasional reminder to ask Callista or verify next quarter. It was all so characteristic of him, methodical, cautious, unwilling to leave me adrift. But what stopped me was a folded document thicker than the others, with a red ribbon pressed flat by the weight of the ledger. I slipped it free, and when I opened it, my breath caught. The deed was written in Italian, the typeface formal, and though I couldn't parse every phrase, the words Polignano Amare leapt from the page. At the bottom, 2 signatures, his and mine. I had no memory of signing. Then I saw the notation beside it, Revocable Trust, Serafine Caldora sole beneficiary. A house. In southern Italy. Mine. I sank back in the chair, heart pounding. A hidden house felt like something out of another life, the sort of dream we used to talk about in our younger years, but never pursued because bills needed paying, and Maribel always had another lesson, another expense. Yet Dominic had gone ahead quietly, weaving a sanctuary into our future without ever telling me. I read the deed again, tracing the seal pressed into the corner. It was not a fantasy. It was real. Sliding the deed back into the ledger, I turned another page and found an envelope tucked into a shallow pocket at the back. The paper was thick, cream-colored, with my name written in Dominic's slanted script. Beneath it, 4 words, open. 30 days after. My hand trembled as I held it. 30 days had passed. I had counted them without meaning to each dawn and dusk marked in silence. And yet, as much as I wanted to tear it open and hear his voice spill from the page, I hesitated. Dominic had been deliberate. If he had written those instructions, then he believed timing mattered. He knew me, knew my impulses, knew I might reach too quickly for answers before grief had settled into its true weight. Waiting those 30 days was his way of protecting me, of guiding me, even when he could not stand beside me. I pressed the envelope flat against my chest and closed my eyes. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, the steady tick of the clock in the hall. For a long while, I simply sat there, feeling the weight of what he had left me. Protection, foresight, perhaps even a path I had not yet dared to walk. Finally, I returned the envelope to its pocket, sliding the ledger back across the table until it rested against the cooling mug of coffee. My thumb lingered on the strap. The letter would wait, just as he asked. I rose, carried the ledger into the living room, and placed it on the mantel beneath the fading lilies. The flowers bent their heads toward it as though they too understood the patience required. When I stepped back, the envelope's presence seemed to fill the room with its own quiet gravity. The day would come to open it. The day was already here, and as I stood in the hush of my home, I knew the first word of his letter would reach me before nightfall. I waited until night, when the house was still, and the only light came from the lamp on the mantel. The lilies had collapsed into themselves, their stems bowing, their petals curled and brittle. I touched the envelope resting against the ledger, as if it might burn me. 30 days. I whispered it aloud like an incantation. 30 days of silence, of pretending to be smaller than I was, of letting Maribel's demands wash over me. Dominic must have known I would reach this point, brittle as the flowers ready to break or to bend into something new. I carried the envelope back to the kitchen table. The chair scraped against the floor as I sat, heart pounding louder than the clock in the hallway. My hands shook when I slid a finger under the seal. The glue parted with a soft sigh, like breath released after too long held in. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, his handwriting dense and deliberate. I smoothed it flat on the table, bracing myself for the voice I had missed so fiercely. Serafine. It began the loops of my name drawn with care. If you are reading this, it means the 30 days have passed. I counted on you honoring that time because I know you. You are too quick to carry burdens before you have the strength. By now, the world has already begun to press against you. Our daughter, especially. I don't write this to hurt you, but to protect you. She will try to treat you as a problem to be solved, not a woman to be cherished. Do not let her manage you. Do not let anyone manage you. You are not a burden. You are my equal and my choice, and the woman who built a life with me, piece by piece. That deserves honor, not instructions. I pressed my hand to my mouth, the words blurring. Dominic had always been steady, not often tender in expression, but every word here was stitched with tenderness I had only glimpsed in small moments. I forced myself to keep reading. You may feel guilty when she insists you cannot live alone, that the house is too large, that the pension is too little. Guilt will be their lever. Resist it. I left you enough, more than enough. You will see it in the accounts and in the trust. And there is the house in Italy. I wanted it to be a place you could stand without shadows, a place that belonged to you without question. It is not only a house, it is an invitation. Live for yourself, Seraphine. Not for appearances, not for obligation, not for a daughter who confuses love with control. Live for yourself. The word struck me harder than I expected, both a balm and a blow. Guilt was already lodged deep in me like a stone. I had replayed Maribel's clipped messages, her impatient tone, convincing myself she only meant well. But here, in Dominic's hand, was confirmation of what I had refused to name. She did not mean well. She meant control. The letter continued, I know you will hesitate. You always choose peace over confrontation, even when it costs you dearly. But I have given you tools to choose differently now. Please, for both of us, use them. You have sacrificed enough. From this day forward, sacrifice nothing unless it brings you joy. I trust you to know the difference. With love that does not end with breath, Dominic. By the time I reached the signature, tears had blurred the ink. I let them fall, unashamed, the sound of my own sobbing loud in the quiet kitchen. For the first time since the funeral, grief felt less like drowning and more like a tide pulling me toward shore. I folded the letter carefully, returning it to the envelope, then placed it back inside the ledger. The paper was damp from my fingers, but it carried a strength that seeped into me as surely as the words had. Dominic was gone, but he had left me more than memories. He had left me permission. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and looked at the dark window, my reflection staring back, red-eyed but steady. The house around me no longer felt like a cage, but like a waiting room. The real decision still lay ahead, and I could feel it pressing closer with every breath. I rose from the table, carrying the envelope with me to the bedroom, and placed it in the drawer of the nightstand. As I slid it shut, I knew the silence would not hold forever. Maribel's voice would soon break it again. The phone rang just after dawn, the sharp sound splitting the fragile quiet that had settled over me since reading Dominic's letter. I knew before I lifted it who it was. Maribel's calls always carried the same rhythm, insistence before greeting, command before kindness. Mother, she said, her voice clipped, we need to talk about the house. It's too big for you. You can't manage it. And the pension is barely enough. You know that. I sat on the edge of the bed, the letter still fresh in my mind. Dominic's words like armor beneath my skin. I wanted to tell her the truth, that the house was mine outright, that the pension was only one piece of a life carefully prepared, that Italy waited for me with open shutters and lemon-scented air. But I said nothing of that. I'm fine, Maribel, I answered softly. I've managed before. I can manage now. She sighed, the sound of someone who had already decided on the ending of a story and was irritated the characters refused to follow the script. You're being stubborn. Crispin and I went through the numbers. This isn't sustainable. You'll end up struggling, and then it'll fall on us. Why not just make this easier? Her words carried a strange blend of efficiency and dismissal, as if my life were a file on her desk she was eager to close. I could almost see her frowning arms folded, tapping her foot the way she used to as a teenager when she wanted money for a dress she'd outgrow in months. I thought of those days often, the way she'd corner me in the kitchen, rehearsed arguments tumbling from her mouth, insisting her needs were urgent and my hesitation unreasonable. Back then, I would give in, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to see disappointment harden into resentment. I mistook compliance for love, silence, for harmony. Now her tone was the same, only sharper with age. The pension won't cover everything, she pressed on. And this house, it's a burden. You're 71, Mother. You shouldn't be alone in a place this size. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I let her words hang there heavy and sharp, then said, I appreciate your concern. That was all. No argument, no explanation. I gave her nothing to push against. She paused, perhaps waiting for me to bend as I always had. When I didn't, her impatience cracked through. You're not listening. This isn't just about you. It affects all of us. Do you understand that I thought of Dominic's letter? They will try to treat you as a problem to be solved, not a woman to be cherished. My chest ached with the truth of it. I hear you, Maribel, I said quietly, though the words meant something different inside me than she assumed. Another sigh, sharper this time. We'll talk again soon. Think about it. The line went dead before I could answer. I set the phone back on the nightstand and stared at the closed drawer beneath it, where Dominic's envelope now rested. I could feel his presence even in the silence after her call, steadying me. He had known this moment would come. He had prepared me for it. Still, a hollow ache opened in me, the kind only a mother can feel. I loved Maribel. I had loved her from the moment I held her tiny body against mine, from the nights she cried, and I sang until my throat went raw. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as someone to love and begun seeing me as someone to manage. The memory that surfaced was sharp, her 17th birthday, when she told her friends within earshot of me that I was useful because I paid for what she needed. Not loved, not trusted. Useful. I had laughed it off, then pretending it didn't matter. But it mattered. It still did. I rose from the bed and pulled the curtains open. Morning light spilled across the room, soft and merciless, at once. The lilies downstairs were gone, wilted into silence, but the ledger waited. I walked toward it, knowing the time had come to return to the pages and the truths Dominic had left behind. The bell over the glass door chimed softly when I stepped into the offices of Glass & Row. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, a scent that reminded me of libraries and church basements, places where silence carried authority. A young receptionist lifted her eyes from a screen, offered a professional smile, and disappeared down a hallway. Moments later, Callista Rowe emerged, her stride, quick, her presence unyielding. Mrs. Caldora, she said, her handshake firm but not unkind. Come in. Let's go over everything. I followed her into an office lined with shelves of leather-bound volumes. The blinds were drawn just enough to let the light in without glare. She gestured for me to sit, then pulled a folder from the corner of her desk. My name was printed neatly on the tab. I reviewed your file after your husband passed, she began. Dominic was meticulous. He left nothing to chance. You should know this from the start. Your house here in Maine is in your name alone. Paid in full. There's no lien, no encumbrance. No one can sell it or even make an offer without your signature. Relief mingled with sorrow in my chest. I nodded, though the weight of Maribel's insistent voice still clung to me. And the Italian property, I asked, my throat dry. Callista's lips curved slightly. She reached into the folder and pulled out a photocopy of the deed. Also yours, Mrs. Caldora. The trust your husband established made sure of it. Revocable, yes, but he revoked it himself before his passing. You are the sole owner. That house is untouchable by anyone else. Your daughter cannot touch it. Neither can her husband. This is your property, plain and simple. The words sank into me slowly, like warm water filling cold hands. Mine. No conditions. No debates. Dominic had wrapped his foresight around me like armor. Callista folded her hands over the folder and studied me with eyes that had seen too many families unravel in rooms like this. You've raised a strong daughter, she said carefully, but strength sometimes tilts into entitlement. I've read enough correspondence to recognize when a child sees a parent more as an obligation than a person. I lowered my gaze ashamed, though I knew it wasn't my fault. She tells me the house is too big, that I can't manage alone, that the pension is not enough. None of that is true? Callista replied quickly, her voice crisp. And even if it were, it would still be yours to decide. Dominic left more than a pension. The investments are stable. The accounts healthy. You could stay in that house for the rest of your life without fear. Her words steadied me, but guilt pressed close behind them. I wanted to defend Maribel, to insist she meant well, but Dominic's letter echoed louder. Do not let them manage you. Callista leaned forward. Mrs. Caldora, you don't have to surrender to her urgency. You are not a burden. You are not a problem to be solved. If you want to keep the house here, you can. If you want to live in Italy, you can. But you must assert that independence. Otherwise, the decisions will be made for you. I felt the truth of it strike me sharp as glass. For so long, I had chosen silence, believing it kept the peace. But silence had only widened the gap between what I felt and what I allowed. Callista slid the deed back into the folder. My advice. When she calls again, and she will tell her no, you don't owe her justification. A simple no is enough. I drew in a breath, steady, letting the word roll silently through my mind. No. It felt foreign, yet freeing. When I left the office, the autumn air outside was brisk against my skin. I walked slowly to the car, clutching my purse close, the folder heavy inside. For the first time in weeks, my steps felt certain. By the time I reached home, the phone was already vibrating on the counter. Maribel's name glowing across the screen. The phone stopped buzzing after a dozen rings, but I let it lie untouched on the counter. My hand lingered over it for a moment, tempted to answer, tempted to defend myself. But I pulled it back. Callista's voice was still with me. You don't owe her justification. A simple no is enough. I walked upstairs to the attic instead. The pull-string light cast a weak glow over boxes stacked in uneven towers, some yellowed from years of dust. I hadn't opened them in ages. I sat on the wooden floorboards listening to the faint hum of the bulb and dragged the nearest box closer. Inside were trophies chipped at the base, but still proud. Maribel's spelling bee wins her soccer medals ribbons from piano recitals she begged to quit after 2 years. Beneath them lay a stack of school projects, poster boards with peeling glue and faded marker. On one, in her uneven handwriting, she had written, "My mom makes the best cinnamon rolls." I ran my thumb over the words, remembering the day she had shown it to me, face shining with pride. I closed the lid gently and pulled another box near. Dresses folded in brittle tissue paper, the blue tulle she wore to her first school dance, the cream lace I sewed myself for her Easter performance. I pressed the fabric to my cheek, the scent of cedar, faint from years in storage. I opened one more, and at the very bottom lay a shoebox filled with Polaroids. Maribel grinning on the swings, Maribel holding her first puppy, Maribel asleep on Dominic's chest when she was small enough to fit there. I held one of her laughing in the sprinkler, her hair plastered against her forehead, her eyes wide with the kind of joy that had no room for impatience or calculation. I packed each memory carefully, wrapping the dresses in fresh paper, stacking the trophies with care, tucking the Polaroids in envelopes. One by one, I placed them into sturdy shipping boxes. It took hours, but when I was done, a small mountain stood beside the attic stairs. Downstairs, I wrote a single line on thick stationery. Some things belong with their owners. I slipped it into the top of the first box and sealed each one with tape. The next morning, a moving service collected them, the driver raising an eyebrow at the weight, but saying nothing. I gave him Maribel's address and watched through the window as the truck rumbled away. The house felt lighter afterward, not because space had been cleared, but because the burden of memory had shifted. I had carried those years for her, preserved them, guarded them. Now they were hers again, to hold or to discard as she chose. It didn't take long for her fury to find me. That evening, my phone erupted with messages. "What is this? Are you out of your mind? Why would you send me this junk?" The word stung junk. Yet I couldn't be surprised. Maribel had always seen sentiment as a weakness clutter in the path of her forward march. Still, I answered none of her messages. I left the phone face down on the counter, the vibrations rattling against the wood until finally they stopped. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the empty space where the boxes once stood. The quiet was deeper now, almost daring. When the phone rang again, the sound was sharper than before. I glanced at the screen. Maribel's name glowed bright, her call insistent. I let it ring until the silence returned, then rose to draw the curtains against the night. In the hush that followed, I realized she would not let this pass. The script she had written for me was unraveling, and I had just torn out the next page. The phone began to ring again, louder somehow, carrying her determination straight into my kitchen as if she were already at the door. I heard the crunch of tires in the driveway before I saw them. Maribel never came without warning, which meant this visit wasn't kindness. It was strategy. By the time the doorbell rang, I had already braced myself. She stepped inside with barely a greeting, her coat unbuttoned, eyes sharp with determination. Behind her, Crispin followed, carrying the faint smell of aftershave and the smug confidence of a man who thought numbers were the only truth worth respecting. He set his leather portfolio on the table before I could offer them a seat, as though this were his office and not my home. Mother Maribel began. "We need to talk face to face. The phone isn't working. You're avoiding me." I folded my hands in my lap. "I've been resting." Crispin cleared his throat. "We just want to help you plan realistically. It's not sustainable for you to stay here. This house is large, outdated, expensive to maintain. It's inefficient." He spoke the word as if it were a stain he could scrub out with the right formula. Maribel nodded quickly. "Exactly. We've already started renovating the basement. Once it's finished, you can move in with us. It will be perfect. You'll have your own entrance, your own little kitchen. You won't be alone." Her tone had softened, but her eyes betrayed impatience. I had heard that note before. When she wanted me to fund a summer abroad program, she barely attended when she wanted me to co-sign for her first apartment. The voice of persuasion layered over entitlement. Crispin leaned forward, flipping open his portfolio. He pulled out printed spreadsheets, columns of expenses and estimates. "Here are the figures. If you stay here, even with the pension, you'll be draining resources. Property taxes, upkeep, utilities, they add up. But if you sell now, while the market is high, you'll free yourself from all of that. It's the most efficient option." I glanced at the numbers, neat lines of ink meant to box my life into rows and totals. Dominic's handwriting in the ledger flashed in my memory. Steady, patient, protective. I thought of his words. "Do not let them manage you." Maribel touched my arm. "Mother, it's not just about money. You'll be closer to us, to Cassia. You won't have to worry anymore. Isn't that what you want?" Her touch was light, but the weight of expectation beneath it was crushing. I stayed still, letting the silence grow. Crispin filled it quickly. "We could list this house next week. I know a realtor who has buyers lined up. A quick sale. Cash, even." He tapped the papers, his smile too polished. "Everyone wins. Everyone except me." I nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "You've thought this through." "Of course we have," Maribel said, relief flooding her face, as if my quiet had already surrendered. "It's the best path forward." I stood gathering the papers from the table, stacking them neatly, and handing them back to Crispin. "I'll think about it." The words were calm, even gentle, but I felt the firmness behind them, the decision already forming beneath my ribs. Maribel exhaled, satisfied. Crispin snapped his portfolio shut. "Good. Don't take too long. Opportunities don't last forever." When they finally left, the air in the house shifted lighter without their presence, yet heavy with the knowledge of what they intended. I walked through the rooms, slowly touching the banister. Dominic had polished each spring. The window frames we had painted together, the kitchen counter where Cassia once licked cookie dough from a spoon. They saw inefficiency, but I saw a lifetime. I knew then I would not allow them to strip it away, not on their terms. The house was mine, but even more than that, my choices were mine. I would not be cornered. By the time night fell, I was already planning my escape, the image of a boarding pass glowing steady in my mind, as if it had been waiting for me all along. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen casting a pale light across the room. I had never been impulsive with travel. Even short trips once required weeks of planning and lists written in Dominic's careful hand. But now, my fingers moved with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. I typed flights to Bari and waited for the search to load. The prices appeared, numbers marching across the screen. My chest tightened as I scrolled through dates, but it wasn't fear, it was the gravity of choice. One ticket, one seat, one step toward something that had been waiting quietly in the ledger. I selected a departure 2 weeks away, a one-way flight. The confirmation screen asked if I was sure. I clicked yes. When the email arrived, I stared at the itinerary until the words blurred. It was real. I had just bought myself a new beginning. Almost immediately, the guilt began to creep in. Maribel's voice threaded through my mind. "You'll be alone. You'll be struggling. You can't manage this house anymore." She would see my departure not as courage, but as betrayal. The thought of her anger, her wounded pride made my stomach twist. I closed my eyes and breathed. Dominic's words rose to the surface. Choose joy before obligation. He had known I would hesitate, that I would put everyone else's needs before my own until I disappeared under the weight. He hadn't bought the house in Italy to trap me in guilt. He had bought it to free me. I tried to imagine telling Maribel. I saw her frown, her arms folding, her voice rising to remind me of every reason I was being unreasonable. No matter how I played the scene in my mind, it ended the same way she dismissed my choice as foolish. For so long, I had let that dismissal keep me quiet. This time, I would let silence be my answer. I left the confirmation email open on the screen while I walked through the house. Each room carried echoes. The dining room where birthday candles smoked into laughter. The den where Dominic fell asleep with the paper still folded on his chest. The hallway lined with family photographs, smiling faces that no longer belonged to the people they had become. I touched the frame of one picture. Maribel at 12, her hair in braids, her grin wide, as she held up the puppy we'd surprised her with that Christmas. I felt the ache of love deep and unshaken, even under the years of disappointment. But love could not be measured in how much of myself I erased for her comfort. Back in the kitchen, the screen had gone dark. I tapped the spacebar, and the confirmation glowed again. I whispered the words aloud. 1 passenger, Boston to Barrie. My voice was steadier than I expected. For the first time since the funeral, the tightness in my chest loosened. There was fear, yes, but braided with it was something sharper anticipation. A new horizon was waiting for me, and this time I wouldn't stand in my own way. I closed the laptop and slid it into the drawer beneath the counter. Tomorrow, Maribel would call again. She would press, she would insist. But I would carry a secret she couldn't touch, I had already chosen. I turned off the light and walked upstairs. The thought of the ticket following me into the dark, steady as a heartbeat, carrying me toward the life Dominic had always wanted me to claim. The flight blurred into a haze of cramped hours. But the moment the plane touched down in Bari, my body seemed to wake in a way it hadn't for months. The air smelled different, heavier with salt, and sun carrying the hum of something alive. I stepped through customs with only a single suitcase, and Dominic's letter folded in my purse, feeling at once like a fugitive and a pilgrim. Giordano Vico was waiting just beyond the sliding doors. He was tall, with hair gone silver at the edges, and a formality that seemed practiced. He held a sign with my name written carefully across it, though. When he saw me, he lowered it and extended his hand. Signora Caldora, welcome. His English was precise, touched by a rhythm that softened every syllable. The drive south wound through olive groves and small towns painted in whites and creams roofs, tiled in clay laundry, flapping from narrow balconies. I watched it all through the window, the blur of color and stone settling something restless inside me. Dominic had chosen this place with care, I realized. Even in his absence, he had led me here. When the car turned down a narrow road, Giordano slowed. "You're home," he said, as though announcing a ceremony. The villa stood at the end of a gravel path, its walls whitewashed to a brightness that caught the sun. Blue shutters framed each window, and beyond them, I glimpsed shadows of rooms waiting. Lemon trees bordered the path, their fruit heavy and golden, releasing a fragrance that cut through the lingering fatigue of travel. Bougainvillea spilled in bursts of magenta along the outer wall, a wildness that made the house feel alive. I stepped out of the car and drew in a breath so deep it felt like my first in months. A woman approached from the neighboring property, wiping her hands on a linen apron. She was small, her hair pinned into a tidy knot, her face creased with lines that deepened when she smiled. "Signora Caldora," she asked, though her tone already carried recognition. "Yes, Ornella Ciara. I live just there." She gestured to the house across the low stone wall. "I looked after the garden when it needed care. My husband built the trellis for the roses years ago when your husband asked." The words caught me by surprise. Dominic had spoken to her, had arranged for these small kindnesses without telling me. I felt suddenly as if I had stepped into a story he had begun, but never finished. "Thank you," I managed. Ornella reached for my hand briefly, her grip warm. "You are not alone here." Then she nodded toward the house. "Go inside. It is waiting for you." Giordano carried my suitcase to the door, unlocked it with a key that glinted bronze in the sun, and stepped aside. The hinges gave a soft groan as I pushed it open. The air inside was cool, touched with the faint scent of stone and citrus, as though the walls themselves had been storing the memory of lemons. I set one foot on the terracotta tiles, then the other, my fingers brushing the white plaster of the wall. A stillness wrapped around me, not the oppressive kind that had filled the Maine house since the funeral, but a stillness layered with promise. For the first time since I had buried Dominic, I felt peace spread through me. Not the fragile kind that comes from pretending, but the kind that settles deep and holds steady. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking into place, and turned toward the rooms, waiting in shadow. The villa was quiet, but it did not feel empty. Each room seemed to carry the impression of a breath just taken, as though Dominic had walked through the door ahead of me and set everything in place. I moved slowly, tracing my fingertips along plaster walls that curved softly into arches, hearing the echo of my footsteps on terracotta. In the sitting room, sunlight spilled through the open shutters, striking the tiled floor in fractured patterns. Against one wall hung a series of framed photographs, landscapes of the coast, some of them faded with age. I lifted one from its hook, a view of the cliffside, dotted with fishing boats, and noticed the back felt heavier than it should. Curious, I turned it over. Wedged between the cardboard backing and the frame was an envelope. My chest tightened. Dominic's handwriting, unmistakable even in its smallest letters, marked the front for Seraphine, when you are ready. I carried it to a small table near the window, my hands trembling as I broke the seal. The paper inside was folded twice, the creases sharp as if he had done so with precision, knowing I would one day smooth them open. My dearest, it began, the words leaning slightly forward, full of urgency and tenderness. If you are here in this place, it means you found what I hoped you would. The house is not meant only for shelter. It is meant to remind you that your life is still yours to shape. I fear that in my absence, others will try to shape it for you. They will push, persuade, even disguise control as love. Do not mistake noise for devotion. I stopped reading for a moment, pressing the page to my chest. His foresight pierced me, how well he had known both of them and me. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and forced myself to continue. This house is your beginning, not your ending. Do not close yourself away. There are neighbors to greet, markets to walk, laughter to share again. Invite only those who ask about your joy before your wallet. The rest have no claim on you. Life is not finished, Seraphine. It is waiting here in every stone, every lemon tree, every sunrise over the sea. Choose it. The words blurred as tears welled again, not of sorrow this time, but of recognition. He was still guiding me, urging me to stretch toward a world beyond grief. I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, sliding it back behind the photograph frame where I had found it. Then I hesitated, changed my mind, and placed it instead on the mantel where I could see it each morning. The villa seemed to exhale around me as if approving my choice. I walked through the rest of the rooms, the small kitchen with copper pots gleaming on the wall, the bedroom with its whitewashed beams, the terrace doors that opened to the Mediterranean, spread wide below. Each space whispered possibility. Each reminded me that Dominic had believed I could live fully without him. I stepped onto the terrace, the sea wind curling against my skin, and let the horizon steady me. His words echoed, "Life is not finished. Choose it." For the first time, I believed I could. The sound of a bell carried from the village below, pulling me back into the present. I turned toward the path that led down to the square, already imagining the voices and faces I had yet to meet. The first week in the villa felt like a dream I was afraid to wake from. I spent my mornings wandering the garden, afternoons walking down to the market, where vendors called out greetings I only half understood, and evenings on the terrace, the sea pulling the sun down into gold. For a time, the silence of my phone was a gift, but eventually, messages began to slip through, first in bursts, then in volleys. Maribel's tone sharpened with each one. "You can't just disappear. This isn't rational. Cassia is asking questions, and I don't know what to tell her. If you don't answer, we'll have no choice but to take action." Action. The word lingered longer than the others. When I finally opened my email one morning, I found a long message from Callista Rowe. She had copied me on her reply to Maribel, who had apparently accused me of being mentally incompetent and incapable of managing my affairs. The accusation should have wounded, but instead it filled me with a cold, clear anger. Callista's response was brief, almost surgical. "Mrs. Caldora's financial and legal standing are in impeccable order. She is the sole owner of both her American and Italian properties, and she has demonstrated no sign of diminished capacity. Any further insinuation of incompetence will be treated as harassment. Kindly refrain from contacting this office again unless you intend to respect the truth of the estate. I read it twice, then again, letting the precision of Callista's words strengthen me. She had cut straight through Maribel's pretense and left no room for argument. My daughter had tried to turn love into leverage, and when that failed, she reached for the law. Now that, too, had slipped from her grasp. The phone rang that evening, Maribel's name glowing against the screen. I nearly ignored it, but something in me shifted. Dominic's voice came back to me steady and insistent. "Do not let them manage you." I pressed the button and lifted the phone to my ear. Her voice came fast, sharp. "Mother, do you have any idea what you're doing? People are asking questions. Crispin is furious. You're humiliating us." "I am living my life," I said evenly. "You've abandoned your family. Cassia is confused. She doesn't understand why you've run off to some foreign country. Do you want her to think you've lost your mind?" I let the silence hang before answering. "I have not lost my mind. I've found it." She scoffed, the sound brittle. "You're not thinking clearly. Selling the house was the only rational option. You can't just upend everything we planned." "We planned nothing," I said. "You decided. You demanded. But my answer is no." Her breath caught a sharp intake that told me she hadn't expected resistance, not in this form. I continued before she could speak again. "Maribel, listen carefully. I will not be managed. Not by you, not by Crispin, not by anyone. This life is mine. This house is mine. My choices are mine. You may not like them, but they are not yours to make." For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hiss of the line. Then her voice, lower, colder. "If you do this, don't expect us to clean up the mess when it falls apart." I closed my eyes, felt the salt breeze slip through the shutters, and answered softly, "There is no mess, except the one you've tried to make of me." I ended the call before she could reply. My hand trembled, but not from fear. The tremor was release, a loosening of the chain I had worn so long I barely remembered its weight. The sky outside had deepened into violet, the first stars beginning to emerge. I walked out onto the terrace and let the night air fill my lungs, the letter on the mantel echoing in my mind. Dominic had asked me to choose life, to invite only those who cared for my joy before my wallet. I whispered his words aloud, letting them root deeper. As I stood there, the phone buzzed again in my hand. This time the name glowing on the screen was not Maribel's, but Cassia's. The message came just after midnight. I had left my phone on the kitchen counter, half expecting another barrage from Maribel, but when I picked it up, the name on the screen stopped me. Cassia. My granddaughter, who hadn't written to me in months except for polite holiday notes, was suddenly reaching out. Her words were hesitant but heavy. "Mom says you're not well. Is that true?" I stared at the screen, the question tightening around me like a rope. For years I had allowed Maribel to be the interpreter of my life for Cassia. She told the stories, framed the pictures, and I remained silent, hoping love would slip through anyway. Now Cassia was asking directly, as if a thread of doubt had finally tugged at her. I carried the phone out to the terrace. The sea shimmered dark under the moon-silver ripples stretching toward the horizon. I lifted the camera and took a photo the waves caught in their restless motion. Then I typed beneath it, "I'm more well than ever." The message sent with a small whoosh, but my heart pounded as though I had shouted it from the cliffs. Minutes later, 3 dots pulsed on the screen. Then her reply arrived. "That doesn't sound like what Mom says. She keeps telling me you're confused, that you're making reckless choices. She said you left because you couldn't handle being alone." I closed my eyes, letting the wind press against my face. I could hear Maribel's voice behind those words, clipped and controlled a tone Cassia had learned to accept as truth. I typed slowly. I didn't leave because I couldn't handle being alone. I left because I wanted to live. There's a difference. Another pause, longer this time. Then, you really don't sound confused. You sound different. Happier? Maybe I smiled, despite the ache in my chest. Yes. Happier. Your grandfather wanted this for me. He made sure I would be safe and free. He believed in me even when others doubted. When her answer came, it was softer. I miss him. I miss how he always made things feel steady. With Mom and Crispin, everything feels like a transaction now. Like love has terms attached. The honesty in her words startled me. For so long, Cassia had echoed her mother, polite but distant, never questioning. Now she was peeling back the curtain. Cassia, I wrote love isn't meant to be managed like an account. Your grandfather knew that. He wanted me and you to remember it. The screen stayed blank for several minutes. I imagined her in her dorm room, lying on her bed, with her phone glowing against the darkness, trying to reconcile her mother's narrative with the grandmother she remembered. Finally, her message came. If you're really okay, then maybe Mom's wrong. But why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you explain before it got this far? I hesitated. She deserved the truth, but not the sharp edge of it, because I didn't want to put you in the middle. You're young, and it's not your job to manage anyone else's choices. I only want you to know this. I'm not broken. I'm not lost. I'm living the life I was meant to live. Her reply was only 2 words. Show me. I knew what she meant. Proof. Evidence beyond the photo of the sea. Something she could hold on to when Maribel pressed her again. I typed back. When you're ready, come see me. Then you'll know. This time, no dots appeared. The silence stretched, but it didn't feel like rejection. It felt like thought, like Cassia, weighing something heavy for the first time. I set the phone down on the table, the sea still whispering below. Dominic's letter sat inside on the mantel, its words alive in me. Invite only those who ask about your joy before your wallet. Cassia had asked about my well-being, not my resources. That was enough. I closed the shutters for the night, knowing her silence was not the end, but the beginning of a question she had to answer for herself. Ornella appeared at my gate one morning, carrying a pair of shears and a basket lined with linen. She spoke little English, but with a wave of her hand and a smile that left no room for refusal, she beckoned me into the garden. The olive trees stretched their branches outward like dancers, mid-pose leaves silvered by the light. Tagliare, she said, placing the shears in my hands. She touched a low branch, dry and thin, and mimed cutting. I nodded, feeling the weight of the tool. I clipped the branch where it met the trunk, and Ornella gave a pleased nod. She pointed to another, then another, each one brittle, or crossing awkwardly into the other's space. Loose, she explained, opening her hands as though parting curtains. Light. We moved slowly from tree to tree, pruning what no longer nourished. With each cut, the canopy thinned, and sunlight filtered deeper into the leaves that remained. Ornella worked beside me with quiet patience, humming under her breath. I began to see the rhythm of it, the way she could look at a tree and know what would thrive and what would only steal strength. My chest ached with recognition. For years, I had let the demands of others tangle around me, draining what should have gone into growth. I thought of Maribel, of the way she framed care as duty, love as transaction. How many branches had I kept only because I couldn't bear to cut them, even as they shaded me from light? When we finished, Ornella handed me the basket, now filled with lemons she had picked while I clipped. Per te, she said, pressing the handle into my palm. For you. Her eyes softened. I thanked her in my broken Italian, and she patted my hand as if to say words weren't necessary. Inside, I set the lemons in a bowl on the kitchen counter, their bright color filling the room with a kind of quiet celebration. I rinsed the dust from my hands and sat at the small wooden table by the window. A notebook lay open there, untouched since I unpacked it. I had brought it from Maine, telling myself it would be useful for grocery lists or reminders, but Dominic's letter had stirred something different in me. I uncapped my pen and stared at the blank page. For a long time, I only listened to the sound of the garden beyond the shutters, birds darting between trees, the breeze pushing through the branches I had just opened to the light. Then, almost without thinking, I began to write. I wrote of the funeral flowers wilting in Maine, of Mary Bell's clipped tone of the ledger, and the letters Dominic had left me. I wrote of the moment I clicked confirm on the flight to Italy, my hand shaking my breath, steadying. The words spilled faster than I expected, not polished or careful, but raw, as though the silence of these past months had been waiting for this outlet. Page after page, I let memory and thought braid together. I wrote about love that had steadied me, love that had demanded too much, and the sharp contrast between the two. I wrote of pruning not just trees, but expectations, illusions, guilt. I began to see my life not only as a string of burdens, but as a garden still alive, capable of renewal if tended with intention. By the time the sun tilted low, I had filled 10 pages. My hand cramped, but my chest felt lighter. I set down the pen and looked out the window. The olive branches I had trimmed shifted gently in the evening breeze, already opening spaces where light could fall. I closed the notebook, pressing my palm against the cover. The pages inside were messy, imperfect, but they were mine. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of something beyond survival, something that wanted to grow. As the first stars appeared over the horizon, I carried the notebook to the terrace and placed it beside Dominic's letter, as if to show him I was finally listening. Then I sat down with the lemons still glowing on the counter behind me, the scent of their zest sharp in the air, and let the night carry me toward tomorrow. I first saw her standing at the gate, a figure uncertain against the brightness of the road. The morning sun fell behind her, and for a moment I thought she was a memory-made solid Maribel, at 19, impatient and sharp-edged. But when she shifted, I caught the hesitation in her stance, the weight of someone carrying more questions than answers. It was Cassia. Her suitcase leaned beside her leg, the wheels dusted from the walk up the gravel path. She lifted her hand as if unsure whether to wave or retreat. I dropped the pruning shears I had been holding and crossed the garden quickly. Cassia. I breathed, and the name carried everything. My surprise, my ache, my love. Her face crumpled the moment I opened the gate. "Nona," she whispered, and in the next instant, she was in my arms, clutching me as though I might vanish if she loosened her hold. Tears dampened my shoulder, and I held her tighter, rocking her as I used to when she was small and restless in the night. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. I believed it. I believed all of it, that you were fragile, that you were slipping away, that you couldn't handle anything. Mom said you were confused, and I didn't question it. I let her words be enough. I pulled back to see her face streaked with tears, her eyes red but unguarded. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." She shook her head fiercely. "I should have come sooner. I should have asked you myself instead of letting her tell me who you were." I cupped her cheek, brushing away a tear with my thumb. "Cassia, I let others define me for far too long. You were only following the pattern. But you found your way to me. That is the courage that counts." We stood there for a moment, the lemon trees behind us, the air heavy with their fragrance. She clung to me again, and I let the silence speak for both of us. When we finally moved inside, she dropped her suitcase by the door and looked around the villa with wide eyes. "This doesn't look like someone who's falling apart," she said softly, a touch of awe in her voice. I smiled. Your grandfather made sure I would have a place to live, not just survive. He wanted me to have this, to begin again." Cassia sank into a chair at the kitchen table, running her fingers over the terracotta surface as if grounding herself. I don't know why I didn't question her sooner. Maybe because it was easier to believe. To think of you as fragile meant I didn't have to see what was really happening. I poured her a glass of water and set it in front of her. "What was really happening?" I asked gently. She met my eyes with a mixture of shame and defiance. "That Mom was using you. That she was making your life smaller so she could make hers bigger. And I went along with it. I let her, because it was simpler than facing the truth." Her honesty cut deep, but I reached for her hand. "Cassia, you are not responsible for the choices of others. You're responsible only for the moment you choose differently. And you chose this. You chose to come." Her fingers tightened around mine. "I don't want to go back to pretending. I don't want to lose you because I was too afraid to see clearly." I leaned forward and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, now salted faintly by travel and sun. "Then you won't lose me. We have time, and we'll use it." Cassia let out a shaky laugh, wiping her eyes with the heel of her hand. "Mom is going to explode when she finds out I'm here." I only squeezed her hand, letting the weight of her words linger without answering them. Outside, the sea whispered against the cliffs, steady as breath, as if reminding us both that life had just shifted into a new rhythm. We sat together in the kitchen, her suitcase still by the door, my heart fuller than it had been in years, and I knew a new chapter in both our lives had begun. The next morning, Cassia and I walked the cliffs above the sea, the breeze tugging at her hair as gulls wheeled overhead. The horizon stretched wide and endless, and she leaned into it as though it might steady her. I carried a small bag with sandwiches and fruit, and we stopped on a stone bench worn smooth by years of salt air. We ate quietly. At first, then she said, "I remember Grandpa taking me out on the dock at night. He'd point at the stars and say they were maps, and that I could follow any of them if I just learned how to look." Her voice wavered, but she smiled. I didn't realize he was telling me I didn't have to stay in one place. I laughed softly, the memory rising vivid and warm. That was Dominic, always hiding lessons in stories. He used to tell me pruning a tree was like pruning a life. Keep what grows, cut what doesn't. He lived by that. Cassia plucked a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. "So what do you want to keep?" I thought for a long moment. The letters he left, the way he trusted me to decide, the mornings where I wake and feel peace instead of dread. Those stay. She nodded. "And what do you cut?" "The guilt," I said firmly. "The idea that I have to earn my place by shrinking myself. That part is gone." Cassia's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I want to cut that too. I've been carrying Mom's expectations so long I don't even know which are mine. But when I'm here, I feel different, lighter." She hesitated, then blurted, "There's a program in Florence, a semester abroad. I've thought about applying, but Mom says it's impractical, expensive, unnecessary. She says I need to stay close." The longing in her voice was clear, but so was the fear. I took her hand and squeezed it. "If you want to be here, Cassia, you can. The choice is yours. Don't let someone else's fear decide the shape of your life." She looked out over the sea, blinking hard, her hand tightening around mine. "Maybe it's time to keep what feels true. Maybe it's time to follow the stars Grandpa talked about." The waves below struck the rocks in steady rhythm, and in their sound, I heard the beginnings of her decision. The phone rang in the late afternoon, the light slanting gold across the terrace. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew it would be her. Maribel's voice came sharp, controlled, as if she had practiced each word. "Mother, listen. This isn't just about you anymore. Crispin says the way things look matters. People are starting to talk about you leaving, about your instability. If you don't come back, it reflects badly on all of us. For Cassia's future. For my reputation. We need to stabilize the optics. The phrasing made me flinch. Stabilizing optics. Not love, not family, not concern. Optics. I let the silence hang long enough for her to sense the shift. "Maribel," I said at last. My voice steady. "Love without regard is a leak, not a lifeline. I have poured myself into you for years, and still you want more, but that well is dry. I won't be managed, and I won't be used." She exhaled sharply, the sound of disbelief edging toward anger. "So this is your choice, to abandon everything for some fantasy. This is my choice," I answered, calm as the sea below me. Not abandonment, not fantasy, freedom. And I won't explain it again. For the first time, she had no retort, only the hollow buzz of the line before she cut the call. When I set the phone down, I turned and saw Cassia, standing in the doorway. She had heard it all. Her eyes were wide, but her mouth curved into the smallest of smiles. "Nonna," she whispered. "I've never heard anyone talk to Mom like that. You sounded strong." I opened my arms and she came to me quickly, folding herself against me like she had as a child. "I'm proud of you," she said into my shoulder. I held her tighter, my heart heavy and light at once. For years I had believed silence was the only way to keep peace, but silence had only kept me captive. Now the words had finally been spoken. The truth no longer hidden behind patience. Cassia pulled back her face, flushed with something like hope. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked beyond her to the garden, the olive branches trimmed and catching the last light of day. "Now," I said, "we build something new." Cassia sat across from me at the small kitchen table, her laptop open, her face lit by the glow of the application form. The cursor blinked at the line where she had typed, "Semester abroad, Florence, Italy." Her hand trembled slightly as she clicked submit. The confirmation screen appeared, and she let out a shaky laugh that turned into tears. "It's real now," she said, pressing her palms to her face. "I'm really coming back here." I reached across the table and covered her hands with mine. "Yes, you've chosen for yourself. That is its own kind of arrival." Later that afternoon, we walked to the garden. A young fig tree leaned against the wall where Giordano had left it for me. Roots bound in burlap leaves, tender and green. Cassia knelt beside me as we dug the hole together, soil cool against our fingers. When we lowered the tree in, I pressed the dirt firm around its base, the gesture grounding me as surely as it would anchor the roots. "This will grow long after us," I told her. "Figs take time, but when they bear fruit, it's worth the wait." Cassia brushed soil from her palms and smiled, like choosing the right life. As the sun dipped lower, I returned to my notebook. The pages had grown fat, with words some crossed out. Others circled, but all mine. I titled the latest section, "Precise Light," remembering Ornella's lesson among the olive trees. "Prune what steals the sun, so what remains can flourish." The pen moved steadily. I wrote of leaving Maine, of Dominic's letters, of the ledger and the villa, and the sound of my daughter's voice pressed against me like a weight I no longer carried. I wrote of Cassia's crossing of her courage to question, of the day she planted a fig tree beside me. Finally, I set down the pen and read the last line aloud, the words filling the quiet room like a benediction. How good that I left the door open, only for those who knock for me. I closed the notebook gently, as though tucking it to rest, and looked out through the shutters at the fig tree swaying in the evening breeze. Cassia stood beside it, her silhouette etched against the fading light. Already part of a story, I was no longer just surviving, but fully living. Outline Ashes in Silence word, count 600. Setting small coastal town in Maine. Main character Seraphine Caldora, recent widow. The funeral flowers are still fresh when her daughter Maribel Quain insists on selling the family home. Maribel claims she already has a buyer and texts, "Start packing. I sold it." Seraphine smiles because she knows something. Maribel doesn't. There's another house in Italy. Hook. What secret has Seraphine kept buried all these years? And why did she never tell her daughter the ledger in the drawer word, count 650? Seraphine discovers her late husband, Dominic Caldora's leather-bound ledger. Inside financial accounts, a pension, and the deed to a villa in southern Italy, hidden under a revocable trust in Seraphine's name. A sealed envelope marked "Open," 30 days after my death. She hesitates, respecting Dominic's timing. Hook. What truths did Dominic anticipate she would need only after a month had passed? The first letter word count 650. Seraphine opens Dominic's timed letter. Dominic warns her that their daughter might treat her as a problem to solve, not a person to cherish. He urges her, "Do not let them manage you. Live for yourself." Emotional reaction, a mixture of grief and empowerment. Hook wills Seraphine. Obey the letter or keep placating her daughter to avoid conflict. Shadows of control. Word count 650. Maribel calls with impatience. The house is too big. The pension is barely enough. Seraphine doesn't reveal the truth. She lets Maribel assume. Memories surface of how Maribel always saw her mother as a resource, not a companion. Hook. How long can Seraphine let her daughter believe a lie before it destroys their bond completely? A visit to Glass and Row. Word count 650. Seraphine visits attorney Callista Rowe, a sharp estate lawyer. Callista confirms the U.S. house is fully in Seraphine's name. The Italian property is hers alone, untouchable. Callista suggests Seraphine assert her independence. Hook wills Seraphine dare to stand against her own daughter or continue hiding behind silence. The keepsake boxes. Word count 650. Instead of packing her belongings, Seraphine packs Maribel's childhood memorabilia trophies, old dresses, school projects, and sends them to her daughter's home with a note. Some things belong with their owners. Maribel reacts with rage. Hook. What will Maribel do when she realizes her mother is no longer following the script? The pressure mounts. Word count 650. Maribel arrives in person, bringing her husband Crispin Vera, who pushes financial efficiency. They corner Seraphine, insisting she move into their basement apartment. Seraphine listens silently, planning her own escape. Hook wills Seraphine confront them directly or slip away quietly. First ticket to elsewhere word, count 600. Seraphine secretly books a one-way ticket to Italy. Internal debate, guilt for leaving her daughters longing for freedom. She remembers Dominic's words, "Choose joy before obligation." Hook will she truly go through with leaving everything she's ever known behind, arrival in Apulia. Word count 600. Seraphine arrives at the Italian villa, welcomed by property manager Giordano Vico and neighbor Ornella Sciarra. Description of the whitewashed home: lemon trees, Mediterranean air. Seraphine feels peace for the first time since Dominic's death. Hook. What will Seraphine find inside the villa besides memories Dominic left behind? Rooms that whisper. Word count 600. Exploring the villa, she discovers a second hidden letter behind a picture frame. Dominic encourages her to open herself to new relationships, new life. Invite only those who ask about your joy before your wallet. Hook wills Seraphine embrace this new life or let guilt drag her back to Maribel's demands. The counterattack. Word count 650. Back in the U.S., Maribel grows frantic. She threatens legal action, claiming mental incompetence. Attorney Callista Rowe sends a blunt rebuttal. Maribel has no claim. Seraphine finally answers Maribel's call. "I will not be managed." Hook. How will Maribel escalate now that intimidation no longer works? Cassia's question. Word count 650. Unexpectedly, Seraphine's granddaughter Cassia Vera reaches out privately. "Mom says you're not well. Is that true?" Seraphine replies with a photo of the sea. I'm more well than ever. Cassia begins doubting her mother's narrative. Hook will Cassia take her own step toward the truth or retreat into loyalty to her mother. The Garden Lessons word count 650. Ornella teaches Seraphine to prune olive branches and tend a garden. Seraphine reflects on pruning as metaphor cutting what drains life to let light in. She starts writing memoir pages. Hook what will grow stronger in Seraphine's life: the roots of guilt or the branches of freedom. Cassia's crossing word, count 650. Cassia shows up in Italy, defying Maribel. Tearful reunion. Cassia admits she believed the fragile grandmother lie. Seraphine welcomes her with open arms. Hook will Cassia's arrival, heal or further fracture. The family inventory of love, word count 450. Seraphine and Cassia walk cliffs, share memories of Dominic, and decide what to keep and what to discard, both materially and emotionally. Cassia considers studying abroad in Italy. Hook can Cassia truly break free of her mother's expectations, or will she be pulled back? The last ask word count 600. Maribel calls one final time, framing her request as stabilizing optics. Seraphine refuses firmly. Love without regard is a leak, not a lifeline. Cassia overhears and is proud of her grandmother. Hook. What will Seraphine choose to build now that she is finally free? Precise light word count, 450. Cassia commits to a semester abroad in Italy. Seraphine Plants a Fig Tree continues her memoir, titled Precise Light. She writes her final line. How good that I left the door open, only for those who knock for me. Hook closing. Is this the end of survival, or only the first page of a new life?